Commercial phenomenon that 1,300 years ago, during the Han Dynasty, made of China a powerful empire. Huge caravans of traders left with silk, tea, pearls to the Middle East, Eastern Africa and Europe, and came back with metals and spices. This marked a prosperity that lasted more than 3 centuries, and that today China plans to re-edit with technology and current innovations. A huge infrastructure of transportation on land and by sea will gather the largest network of investments that will connect Asia, Europe, Africa, and also Latin America and Caribbean. The plan has its clear allies and those who look at it through curtains. Geopolitical disputes of the day play behind. Chinese Silk Route, the new geopolitical world game. This is our critical move today. We will watch actors and news together with you. President Xi Jinping started on Friday, March 22, a visit that will take him to Monaco and France. He arrived to Rome some hours ago together with his wife, Benju Duan, and at the airport where he was received by high officials, that bilateral officials has outspent time for 49 years. The idea is to take mutual relation to a new era that guarantees better future, especially for Italy. In this sense, the Silk Route plays a core role. It is expected that they sign an agreement with Italy, which will be very important for Italy, that has detached a little bit from G7, less taxes and new financial sources. It seems to be a safeguard, although it is not so pleasant for the European Union or the United States. The agreement has been worked for months. The old Silk Road is testimony of our ancestors, something that promoted a significant connection between the Euro-Asian continent. The Silk Route was an instrument of approach between peoples and to share knowledge and mutual discoveries. The new thing must be a double-way road beyond goods. It should also be a road for ideas and skills, solutions to common problems. I am pleased to verify the growth of relations between our two countries in the scientific and technological spheres. We will now review some sources. El País from Spain on December 2018 called the new Silk Route, the new strategic plan of China, with this China where we identify in yellow the economic hall and in blue the maritime route, because both initiatives are planned. The first, the economic route, starts in Central Asia and China, of course. The second, it starts in the Arctic. It crosses Japan, Malaysia, Sri Lanka on the one side. On the other hand, Italy, Greece, Ethiopia, and Turkey. On this map in gray, we also see railroads. In red, oil and gas ducts, 41 in all, that are planned to be built with this new Silk Route, and more than 140 nuclear stations. I now go Infobae. We have on March 18, this site published China, which the European Union looks with new eyes. the main conversations in Brussels is not Brexit, but China. The European Union is concerned about technological matters because after being leader in the first generation of mobile telephony, today it cannot develop 5G without the assistance of Huawei. This topic is a specific matter of concern in Italy, together with telecommunications and its infrastructure. Another item also are investments made by China in new technologies that are not comparable. For example, Angela Merkel, German premier, announced investments of 10 million euros by 2025, and China said that it would invest 130 million by 2030. The EU initiative needs a Chinese collaboration because it means 30%, twice than the United States. Let's go to our recommendation, which is called Why the Attack Against China by Eduardo Montes de Oca, political analyst. And it reads, in these times, the dragon has kept unstoppable development, and its GDP is equal to 65% of the U.S. GDP, with the expectation to exceed it in the next 5 years, according to exports. The Silk Route is added to do that would gather 100 states of the round. Globalization, is this different from growing isolation, with additions like the National Manufacturing Plan 2015 aimed to increase quality in technologies? In conclusion, the goal of the United States is not to reduce its public debt, but sustain the Titan that is sinking. This is the opinion of Eduardo Montes de Oca, which we will compare with our other guests' opinion. Perhaps they agree or not. We will see that. With regards to Xi Jinping's visit to Europe, which first stop was in Rome, the signature of an agreement that adds Italy and the Silk Route, we want to connect with Europe, and we're going to Madrid with Edwin Marin, our first guest. Greetings from Madrid. Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is visiting Rome, has announced that his country is ready to include Italy in what is called as the Silk Route, which will imply more commercial relations and investments between both countries. According to data broadcast, this will mean more investments in sectors like the marine, aeronautics, aerospatial, culture, and also the construction of several ports in the north of the country. This will also help grow commercial exchanges between both countries that are currently around $50 billion and investments in $20 billion. This is a trade movement that will be redefined tomorrow with the signature of the agreement, and this is why the United States is concerned. The European Union is also looking at this movement of China towards Italy with fear. We will see how it develops in the future. Besides, Italy becomes the third Mediterranean country in attracting Chinese capital after Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus. According to several political analysts, this is also seen with concern by the United States because they are immersed in a commercial war with China and is looking at its European unions. The European Union on Stern is afraid of China slowly creating strategic infrastructure in the European continent. This also shows, according to political analysts, that the current Italian administration formed by opposed poles like the right wing of the North League and the left of that movement called Cinque Stelle, but both are being anti-establishment and that are proving they are getting away from the European Union system to approach China and bring Chinese capital to the country. We will see how this develops. Tomorrow, Italy will sign this memorandum of understanding with China. Of course, we can see that the new Silk Route will lead to important changes. Which and how, we ask? And it's also interesting to specify because there are already ongoing projects and others are already concluded with more than 1,000 projects. How will these change our societies in social economic terms? Regarding the concerns our correspondent was talking about, how longer could they be sustained? We'll answer this after this pause. We are back with our critical move that today deals on the new Silk Route of China. We were asking a new geopolitical world architecture. At the beginning, we were saying that on the table is the possibility of Italy's adhesion, which brings uncertainties inside the community bloc. Let's go to Russian information Sputnik. Portugal finalizes its adhesion to the new Silk Route. This happened in last December on 5, the last month of last year. President Xi Jinping was paid an official visit to Italy and signed 17 agreements, including Portugal's incorporation to the route. She was saying that in general, the incorporation documents will be motor forces for an integral association. The Chinese market to sell to Portugal and vice versa, investments, financing, and that's it. A strategic plan with several geopolitical and economic branches for those who oppose it and are well identified, an instrument of hegemonic domination for promoters. It is a great opportunity of development for forgotten regions and the way of making a more cohesioned and better communicated world from the Arctic to Latin America and the Caribbean. For China, the Silk Route has so much geostrategic relevance that in 2018 it was included in the constitution of the Communist Party with strategic lines. It is about configuring a powerful infrastructure network in the 5 continents where China will contribute with all its technology and knowledge, including land and sea route. By 2017, more than 100 countries had supported the initiatives, and more than 400 air routes with direct flights from China to 43 countries were already established, besides railroad lines between Europe and China that generate more than $100 billion in taxes and more than 180,000 jobs. Besides project, it has trade, commercial, financial, security, and cultural factors. A guest in Kazakhstan, an urbanization in Malaysia, an artistic exhibit in Unwan in the east of China. One of the key projects is the economic hub that would unite China, Pakistan through the Pakistani port of Wadar, and that created disputes with India. The open commercial war with the United States seems to give more importance to the Strait because of more exports and imports. According to President Xi, in April 2019, the second summit of the Silk Route will take place to talk about the strategic plan. The first took place in May 2017 with more than 100 countries. After these data, other characteristics and numbers will be contributed. China's new Silk Route was presented as a project in 2017 by President Xi Jinping in several summits in Kazakhstan and Jakarta, Indonesia. At the beginning, it was only limited to neighbor countries and the construction of infrastructure. In 2015, the document of the guidelines and actions to make this strategic plan come true was established. Then, a geographic and sectorial expansion was thought, and it is considered the most ambitious plan of China. It has two initiatives, a land belt and a marine route. In all, the economic belt groups 70% of the world population, more than 75% of world energy reserves, and 55% of the world GDP. It is the totality. The project is expected to be completed by 2025. More than $4 billion will be invested in the next 3 decades, most invested by Chinese companies, government, Bale, Trail Fund, and Bank of BRICS. The corridor will start in central China. They will go to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Russia, Germany. It will go down to Italy and Greece until it reaches the heart of Africa. In the south of Italy, it would meet the land, the maritime route that will cross the South Sea, the Chinese South Sea and Indian Sea. It would also go to Africa and continue towards South and Central America. Because of the expansion of the works, it also includes the longest high-speed railroad that would link Cebu with Madrid, which is in experimental phase. It will be complemented with a network of ports and coast infrastructure that will approach China with Southeast Asia, Persian Gulf, Africa, and North Mediterranean Sea, as well as airports, urbanizations, at least 41 gas and oil ducts, and other commercial energy and transportation infrastructure. With this information, we'd like to add analysis with our guests. From Argentina, we have Marcelo Ramirez, geopolitical analyst, Euno Muy Espejos from Spain. We thank both for your participation in this critical move. I start with Marcelo. From the formality, we were saying that Italy will be incorporated through a memorandum of understanding that could be signed the next hours in Rome. There are concerns both inside and outside, in the European Union, the G7, NATO. What does this movement need for China and Italy? We are looking at China As a main actor, we are looking at the United States, and China's progress is a natural consequence of that process. China, on one hand, is guaranteeing its access to European markets and also perform something that avoid a possible sea blockade by the United States with land or coast strips. It will be able to break the sanitary blockade that the United States has performed in the last years. We are looking at significant geopolitical change. This also means that the United States has to respond somehow. It has to look at the European Union and the European Union to Italy to avoid it. But I think that would be irreversible by now. Now, Jose Antonio from Spain, how concerned is Brussels? There are some countries that are questioning, but that have similar agreements, paradoxically. That's why Italy says we don't understand why so much concern. A fraternal greetings for you and Al Telesur. Of course, the European Commission that conducts the European Union is highly concerned by the situation and the attitude of Italian administration, not only in relation to the Chinese route and strip. We must say that the European Commission has recently declared that China is a systemic challenge to the values of the European Union that they interpret as completely subordinate and allied to those of the United States. So in this situation, let's say it's the most important challenge that Italy has made to that European imperial and U.S. order, because undoubtedly it's the most important challenge, and it has done several. For example, it has despised the self-proclaim of Mr. Guaido and sent several critiques to France with its neo-colonial situation in Africa, and has demanded the end of sanctions against Russia. The summit of irritation for pro-U.S. European bureaucrats is today. The visit made today and tomorrow of the first secretary of the Communist Party of China and president of China to sign the memorandum of understanding with this new Silk Route that is a world revolution at the technological, commercial levels. I would like to ask Jose Antonio, recently a meeting took place with China and the institutionality of Brussels. And in the case of Spain, last December, President Xi Jinping visited Madrid with an official visit with all ceremonies and meetings with businessmen, agreements and declarations, but nothing about the route. Why, if Spain accepts Brussels pressures, or are there other interests we are not looking at? There is a paradoxical situation because Spain and Italy are countries, similar countries. Let's say that Italy has a certain economic advantage because it's the third economically important country of the European Union. Spain is also a very important partner. But what happens is that geopolitically, while Spain becomes a midget, we must only have to see in relation to Venezuela the subjection of President Sanchez with Trump, while Italy with all its political problems and with a government that is quite curious, becomes not in a political giant because the geopolitical giant is China and Russia, but at least a country with independent ambitions according to its economic and technological capacity and the expectations of the economic reanimation that the Chinese investments will be, because this is what the Italian government has with regards to the self-humiliated position of the Spanish government. I now ask Marcelo, who is waiting from Argentina. President Xi Jinping declared last August, after some offensive declarations of some U.S. authorities that are concerned with such ambitious project, that this is not a hegemonic project. It does not have military purposes. It has nothing to do with the debt, as Mike Pence just declared. And he was talking about Chinese globalization. Can you help us with this concept? I think that this is true. The way how China moves is very as the Anglo-Saxon world. What we see from China is that it's a country with a very long commercial history. So they are interested in trade, of course, benefit for them as any nation, but they don't have an imposition attitude just like Western powers do. I think there is a transfer and a protection of Western countries, or in this case of the United States, to generate a situation similar to what they believe would happen if it was them in their place. In this case, China does not need to appeal to any military resource just to guarantee its political and economic independence and to guarantee the performance of its commercial routes. It does not have the goal of establishing bases in Europe or attacking the Europeans in any way. But we can't say the same with the United States, that which policy is based on military imposition. I think that understanding Chinese globalization is different to what we have been accustomed to. We must understand that all Chinese investments are state investments, and you're dealing with China and the Communist Party and not with corporations that see the reality according to their interests. That happens in the West with such powerful corporations that have their own policies that many times confront their national policies. So in these terms, I think that it is a new world structure that the United States must accept because there is no other way to act. The only country that can offer economic stability to Europe is China. The United States is no longer capable of doing that, so it has to assume it. Regarding this Chinese globalization, I go back to Professor Jose Antonio. There are ongoing projects and others concluded, like the Economic Hall, China-Pakistan. The new route is changing realities in practice? Yes, because we must see that the route is received by the African people as a blessing, of course, and as an alternative, as a predator system that, by the way, the Italian government has made responsible to the has blamed the French government, France-Afrique, a neo-colonization in Africa. In this situation of impoverishment and non-development in Africa, this route is very important. But this route also crosses the old socialist countries, or some of the old socialist countries. They will cross it. Poland, Croatia, Hungary, Czech Republic. And this is also another alternative, because the promised investments in the U.S. Development model after the fall of the socialist field has not satisfied the aspirations of the Eastern Europe that has become a recolonization zone. Some Slovene sociologist I read compare its country with the situation of Latin America subject to recolonization and the famous Monroe Doctrine. So I am sure that many zones of Asia see this Silk Route as a source of investments, and China, in view of the possibility of great centers of capitalism like Japan, the European Union, the United States falling in crisis, are seeking for new trade networks to provide its huge industrial capacity that Chinese socialism has built in the last decades. This is why they talk about win-win. Both parties of the Silk Route, which is of which China is the trigger. These countries will obtain different kinds of benefits, and this is why I say this will be a technological and commercial revolution in the beginning of the 21st century that would consolidate the commercial, technological, economic, and political of Chinese socialism. 21st century technological revolution. Is this strategic plan, Marcelo, a radical turn in the world geopolitics? Could it be the opportunity to reconfigure a new order, different to the one we have, such an efficient, unfair, and unequal that we have today? I think that we are in that process. I don't think that this happens overnight. It will be gradual, and if we see it in historic terms, it is very fast. The new process we have not necessarily needs to be fairer. We can't know that. And it is undoubtable that the former one was very unfair, and that the opportunity to have a more multipolar, with more actors, more voices, could be where they won't necessarily impose the markets to the countries, where there could be a different vision of commerce, because we see that the West has an individualist, materialist, hedonist system, and having as the basis a Chinese-Russia alliance, we could see values in another way. China is taking people out of poverty, and they have announced for the mid of the 21st century is to achieve that all Chinese people live well. They have been planning this from the times of Deng, and what they say is that to be socialist, they not necessarily have to live poorly. We can all live well, says. So this clashes with a model that has been prevailing until now. We see the United States. We see great poverty in the cities in the United States. So there are people who are richer, and there are marked difference with concentration of wealth in very few hands. So the model that China is promoting is much more inclusive than the one we have until now. It will be, we don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but it's worth to open the door. Thank you very much to both our guests. What relevance does Latin America and the Caribbean have in this strategic plan? Is it one of the geographic areas that of most concern of the United States because of the huge amount of strategic resources of the region and the proximity to its territory? We will continue this analysis after this pause.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Chinese Silk Route, the new world geopolitical architecture. This is our critical move today. The United States attacks the new Silk Route. Latin America is especially a sensitive area where it has strong ideological political links, but China also has relations. Will the United States exert its power, or can China stop it? We will go with some data and come back to analyze with our guest. China keeps stable with an average growth of 6.5% per year. Its plan to re-edit the Silk Route will place it in a very hard geopolitical place, hard to rebate. The United States has made hard verbal attacks against the route and even the possibility of reactivating sanctions against those countries that will adhere to railroad and marine and trade communication networks. In 2018, Vice President Mike Pence said this is a trap with low-quality projects and will commit sovereignty. Paradoxically, the United States accuses China of wanting to control the world and having everything to have appointments in decisive international positions and arbitration disputes as it has in South Chinese Sea. In view of these accusations, Chinese president said that the Strip and the route do not conceal any political agenda and is not a trap for the least favored nations. In the case of Latin America, it said it has a privileged space for its raw material, natural resources, and a territory of old political alliance, even with antagonic governments. The Silk Route will meet Latin American coasts with the Asian coasts between the Community of Latin America and Caribbean Countries, ECLAC, Juan G said that it's probable that the route does not seem as ambitious as Eurasia. Nevertheless, Latin America must play a key role. In 2017, Chinese companies and banks invested $23 billion that will be expressed in direct transportation. It has its main commercial links with Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru. We continue our analysis with expert in politics. Thank you for being here. Julián, I would like to ask you if you agree when we say that the Popular Republic of China, with the new modalities and different relationships, reaches Latin America and the Caribbean, but without making much differentiations between governments and ideologies, because, of course, the zone has differences, but there are old alliances that are strong. Yes, of course, there's a series of elements related to the economic structure of many countries, the system, and the second aspect is time. This experience with Italy is a lesson that's important to observe because that could happen in Latin America as well. First, the European structure, that is some kind of a chain for European citizens, and European citizens say that this have to change. Some of this happened in Italy and has shown three expressions of rupture with the model and the rules of the European Union. And this strange federal association that imposes the economy in Europe, which is the budget that has had differences with Italy, something related with foreign policy. Italy disregarded the position with Venezuela when they pretended to be to place a U.S. agent as president of Venezuela and articulate to the economic structure that the Silk Group proposes. Now, there's a fact that is real. Today, China is different from the European model and the large countries. Its structure and GDP, more than 50% is agriculture and industry, contrary to the European countries and U.S., where services is more than 70%. There's an advantage that is great because China produces the real economy. Of the 10 main ports of the world, China has the first, Shanghai, but it also has 7 out of 10. If we incorporate Hong Kong and Singapore, which is on the list also in Asia, somehow have relation with China, and then in South Korea, and then Dubai. The main European port is Rotterdam. Of course, it has a presence in the south of Europe because in this strange geographic segmentation, Europe has, it's a second floor where Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands command. And Spain, unfortunately, is the European forward. I think that there's a political and cultural transformation this century. Unfortunately, I'm not going to live time enough to see it. I would like to know how many monarchies of Europe will remain at the end of this century. I think there will be few. The European representative model will be replaced by new ways of republic because the main problem of Spain is that it's a monarchy. It's not a republic, and citizens are limited in their decisions. The same is happening with Latin America. The United States is reacting in an attempt to stop representation model. With a group of Lima, a model to command Latin America. We have to be creative enough to incorporate to this process of new economies. But we have to review our internal structures and give the peoples more representation in these times. I think it's a very interesting experience, and there's an observation made that allegedly Latin America doesn't have much to contribute, but it does. I'll give you an example. You trace a straight straight line from Caracas to Buenos Aires, it's closer to arrive, let's say, a railroad than go to Salvador de Bahia. It seems that inside the continent, Venezuela could have a very important contribution with a port. It's easier to go to Bolivia from Venezuela with a railroad that crosses Brazil and goes to Bolivia than going through marine routes. So we have the possibility of creating another world in this century if we decide to transform our internal economic structures. And Venezuela could be the light of Latin America if they add. And is this possible with all the political ideological differences of this time? The Venezuelan society must change. I'm talking about the region. Of course, we have to defeat the bourgeoisies that are using laws to pursue and murder leaders, as happened in Colombia, because the goal is to build a model, according to Washington, that restricts the sovereign rights and the people's participation rights. If this compels a debate and transformation of all the Latin American political structures. There has been a setback because everything proposed by President Chavez regarding integration, ECLAC, UNASUR, has been dismantled. We must be aware of this and go to a new phase where we rupture dominion of centuries like Brazil. That has been for 3 centuries, the British phantom commanding. We have to break the colonial scheme that still persists in Latin America.
Ahora, le pregunto, si usted considera que la nueva
Do you believe that the new Silk Route proposes new geopolitical reconfigurations that will enable to create a new world order in a certain sense in the midst of the great global clashes? The Silk Route is a new construction where peoples articulate. The huge majority of the peoples of the world do not share the capitalist system that has prevailed until now. The inequality, the command of the dollar since the Second World War. And the peoples are seeking for different ways of communication, exchange. The great advantages in the world and trade make it possible. We have great transformations that must be used in favor of the people. The peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America are aware of the huge potentials. The United States is trying to stop it through violent means. We have seen its persistence in destroying an interocean canal in Nicaragua. This is doing it through sabotage, violence, and direct action against Nicaragua. Justifications will abound, but the firm decision of building an alternative metal must break dependence. One of the great problems we have in Latin America, and specifically Venezuela, is the private bank's adhesion to the U.S. bank system, which has a complete identity. Would this be changing a dependence for one system for another? The nations should control their actions. And of course, a nation that has the possibility of deploying its infrastructure should not only extract resources, but transfer them to its society, and at least the possibility of development, building quality of life, social development, and of course, balance the world and taking decisions. A world, it seems like Calderón de la Barca would say, we are in a dream, but a dream that is a nightmare for many peoples today. Thank you very much, Julia, for being with us. Now it's time for our conclusions in the last minutes. China, with a productive agro-industrial model, a transition economy, proposes to build a Titanic project, relaunch the traditional millenary Silk Route in a format model, and build a broad infrastructure on land and sea necessary to supply merchandise from east to west with preferential conditions. It is a scientific, technological technology in the 21st century. Welcome for the least developed, affected by war, African, Middle East countries, and for those who in recession because of the global crisis, which is especially south of Europe and Italy and Spain. United States, with its unilateral representation model in crisis, tries to block this project. This gives us an idea of dispute, but an idea that is renovating and is proposing an alternative development and interconnection model. This is the end of our critical move. Thank you for being with us.